I think it's a very important piece to give your kids multiple adults in life to be able to trust, because I think we need to know naturally, especially through the teenage years, your kids aren't going to tell you anything. I remember having this conversation with like my teenage boys at one point. I have a boy who's 19 and 20. So I think when they were like 16 and 17, I was like, but why wouldn't you tell me anything? And they were like, there are just some things you don't tell your mom. I was like, right. But what could I have done? Like, and they're like, Mom, are you crazy? There's just some things we're never going to tell you. And I'm like, right. So that being said, but what I said to them was, is there someone in your life that you would tell? Like, could you tell a Rebbe? Could I build a relationship for you with a therapist that like you'll have throughout your life, that if you need them, you could come back to them? Is there like an uncle that you know has your back, and that I will give permission that he doesn't have to tell me everything, but you can call him. So I just want to start by saying that we do need to normalize and know that there are some things that are kids, but can we build very consciously relationships with multiple adults in our children's life, so that they do have a support circle around them and not just us?
Anything that you might be caught up in, any situation that you might feel that might have compromised you or made you feel guilty or made you feel embarrassed or made you feel somehow less than, or whatever the case is, should never be an obstacle or a hindrance from bringing it up to your parents, because we will always have your back.
There are legitimate reasons why kids wouldn't talk to their parents, especially in the area of child safety, because they're made to feel ashamed. So we told the kids growing up, if there's anything going on in your life, we want to please feel comfortable talking to us. And there's no reason to be embarrassed. And if we're going, you might think we're going to be upset if you tell us things we're not happy with. Of course, we'll be upset about it, but we'll be much more upset if you don't feel close enough to talk to us. I mean, that's really would be my advice to parents. Just think about the legitimate barriers and honestly just check them off. And it becomes a relationship built on trust, hopefully.
It's just struck me as you're talking, and it's so true. It's vulnerability, and I also think it's humility. It's okay for parents to admit that they're wrong. It's okay for them to say, I feel like so much of parenting is our pride sometimes gets in the way. And it's hard for us to admit when maybe we feel like we've done something wrong or haven't done enough. And so we try to just work it into a conversation. It's okay to just sit down and say, maybe I haven't done enough. Or maybe there's something that I could have done better. Or maybe last time you shared something with me, maybe I didn't handle that the best. But I want to get better at that. I want to get better at handling it better for us.
Personally, I definitely lean towards telling my parents, because I know that, okay, if they say that I can't go, I'll respect what they say. But at the same time, if I go to my parents telling them, then I think they have a trust that, if I'm going and telling them, then, I'm not going to be doing anything bad, and, they'll have that trust in me. But also, I know for myself that, if I lie about it and continue on this lie, they will find out somehow in some way, and that will definitely just cause a lack of trust, and they won't let me go to anything in the future.
Obviously, if it's a case that's very severe and very serious, I would tell my parents. But if it's something like a little bit less serious or whatever, then I don't know if I would go to my parents right away, only because I know that it'd probably scare them a lot. It honestly depends on the situation, because you don't want to scare I wouldn't want to scare my parents and make it seem like it's more serious than it is. So if it's something that's not so serious, then I would go to my friends, because I just would feel more comfortable telling my friends, and I know that not that they would understand, because if they haven't been in the same situation, but they would be on this, they would kind of understand it a little bit more than parents, because parents sometimes have a relationship with their kids where they're very protective over them. So it's different than when your friends are. It's just
I feel what Emily said about being scared. You said to about your parents or something. I feel that's very relatable. People are almost scared what their parents are gonna think of you, even though I feel parents love you unconditionally. So I feel like you kind of have to reinforce that in different, even when you're younger, if you steal a pencil or something from someone, you get in trouble at school, your parents just I feel should engrave that in your mind that they love you no matter what, even though you did something bad.
Welcome back to the Jews Next Door podcast, where each month we explore a different topic of our parenting hierarchy with the goal of raising the next generation of passionate and committed Jews. I'm your host, Rabbi Avremi Zippel, and this month we are taking a break from our parenting hierarchy to do 4 episodes with a special focus on Child Safety Month in honor of the special Child Safety Month. And it's my pleasure to turn it over to the Executive Vice President of the OEU of the Orthodox Union, Rabbi Moshe Hauer, to frame this month for us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zippel. Thank you for what you do on the Gen Aleph podcast every month, raising the conversation with parents about a principal role of every person to be an excellent parent, to be an engaged parent, an effective parent, a loving parent for their children. What this month is presenting on Gen Aleph is actually a meeting of goals. Separate and apart from this wonderful project, we felt, thinking at the Orthodox Union of tasks and responsibilities, that the need to educate parents in our community, to speak to the community generally about a subject which is present in our community, the subject of child safety, the need to have a strong and enhanced sense of child safety. It was something that we as an organization needed to do. And in a sense, not just as a matter of normal, but exceptionally, to bring it up, to bring it out. It's not a new subject. It's been, thank God, it's been on the table, discussed by the community for decades now. But that has not made it any less necessary for us to educate sharply and clearly about it. And when we thought about how to approach it, we said, we took 2 steps, and those steps are represented here in the opening of this first podcast. One is, we said, we can use the wonderful gift of Rabbi Zippel and his podcast, his frame, in order to be able to bring and teach these messages. And number 2, we're going to draw upon serious, respected, and beloved partners, not partners, pioneers, people who I can say personally, and I know that there are dozens, hundreds of rabbis and others who could say exactly the sentence I'm about to say. 2 people who have led the way, who have been personal mentors in how to approach and how to teach and how to strengthen the protection of children in our time, Rabbi Yakov Horowitz and Mrs. Debbie Fox. I've had the privilege to work with them for decades, to learn from them, to watch them. And we said together, let's sit down, let's think, let's use the wisdom and experience of a seasoned mechanech who's been dealing with this issue, an exceptional mental health professional who has taught and paved the way, the systems to address this issue. And let's come up with the best little package of lessons that every parent would benefit from and would truly, truly raise their ability to do this. We wanted to do it for this month of November, which in the general world of America is Child Safety and Protection Month. And we need it too. We need the education as well. Plans shifted a bit because of the tragic events of October, which have taken so much of our focus. But now we bring it to you. Some will listen to it now. We believe that what is being created here will be a resource for more than the coming month, but will be a resource that people will call upon in an ongoing fashion. That's the context, that's the background. And we're very grateful to Rabbi Zippel, and we're exceptionally grateful to Rabbi Horowitz and to Mrs. Fox for their leadership and their guidance.
Thank you, Rabbi Hauer. Thank you for framing this very important month for us. So, when we were in the past couple of months, as we have been organizing and preparing and really planning this month, we, as Rabbi Hauer mentioned, we've been having various meetings with everyone here, with Mrs. Fox, Rabbi Horowitz, Rabbi Hauer, and we really put it into a framework of 4 episodes, with the first episode focusing on the importance of the parent-child communication, the parent-child relationship. So I want to open with number one, if you can just frame for us both, Rabbi Horowitz, Ms. Fox, why is it that was where we went? What was the thought process behind that?
Yes, I would answer that it really is my belief that this single most important tool towards keeping all of our children safe is the parents. I really believe that. I believe that the more open communication at home, the more parents learn the skills to talk to their children about prevention at home, to have the appropriate discussions with their children, that they build a foundation of safety at home, and that they can teach their children that which they need to know, and teach their children to come and talk to them and to ask questions to them, that really builds the basis and the foundation of safety. I really believe that communication between them builds the foundation of safety, and even if something happens, or even if there's a question, or even if something uncomfortable happens, the children know to come to the parents, and the parents can stop it right there. So I believe building that foundation of safety in the home, I think that's really the basis of what can help keep kids today safe.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Rabbi Horowitz.
I completely concur with Mrs. Fox. I think that is the number one attribute that parents can contribute to the children's safety, is to have an open relationship, just like Mrs. Fox said, that we can speak to them about anything. They can come to us if they're feeling uncomfortable. And remember, if they're being groomed, or God forbid worse, it is an extraordinarily uncomfortable conversation to have. Adults have a hard time admitting that they've been abused or things like that happen to them. And, another way of looking at it, and I'm developing it in some of the daily parenting clips on child safety that I'm doing together with Rabbi Menschel, and we're partnering with Jen Aleph on this, is to think of the reverse engineering that goes on. In other words, what we do in child safety education is we look to see what abusers, what tools they use to try to get to kids, and what they're really looking for are, sadly, they look for isolated children. They're afraid of children who talk to their parents, precisely because such a small percentage is strangers and stranger danger. It's much more likely to be someone in that inner circle, a family member, a friend, someone in the community. So if the child says one thing to a parent, they could wind up in jail. So they look for isolated kids. Therefore, because they look for isolated kids, and because they look for children who haven't been spoken to about their personal space, we specifically focus on the parent-child relationship, because the abusers can tell. They have evil and brilliant ways of finding out which kids are isolated. So that's the best advice that we could give to parents, is to really engage and do whatever you can to build your relationship, just as Mrs. Fox said, where the kids are comfortable sharing the day with you, where you're comfortable talking to them about anything, and especially that we have that exit ramp, God forbid, if something is going wrong, that they can come talk to us and get the help they need.
Totally. You mentioned just now that it's not so common, that really the stranger danger concept that used to really be the thought process, it's not as common anymore. And it's not really what's so prevalent. So that's
right.
It's
and
a great
stranger
segue.
Danger, Rabbi Menschel, right, correct. So the strangers are less likely to get caught in that way, because they God forbid, a stranger abuses a child and runs away. Because the abusers are close to them, that's why parental engagement is so important, because you can highlight that during the process and while everything is going on.
Sure. And that's also a great segue into our second episode, where we specifically spoke about setting up a healthy home and the right boundaries. And perhaps we can explain a little bit more as we, frame the context of the month, what the thought process was, going in that order, and why we specifically spoke about the, setting up that healthy home. Rabbi Horowitz, you want to start us off for that one?
it's all about parents setting guidelines and boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not, teaching children about their body autonomy, about their right to their personal space. And it doesn't start with child safety. It's teaching them that they have their own drawer. Research shows that if children have their own drawer at home and they knock when they go into other people's rooms, they're more likely to exhibit defensive behavior if somebody encroaches on their space, because they've been trained from a very young age that they have a right to their personal space. So it's those types of boundaries that help children stay safe, even if it doesn't seem directly related to child abuse prevention, but it gives the kids a certain sense of empowerment that they have a right to stand up when their space is encroached upon.
Sure. Mrs. Fox?
I would say that when discussing this second component, I think we all felt passionately about making sure that our home was safe, because the statistics show that over 90% of abuse happens from people who are known, loved, and respected by the child. They're people in our world. And so whether it's people within our homes or whether it's people who are coming to visit or have relationships with our children in one way or another, there is a lot of the abuse that happens at home. And so it's really important that we know how to create safe boundaries at home. And we need to do everything possible to make sure that nothing inappropriate happens in our own home. And so really the goal of this is to give every parent the information that would be helpful to look at creating safety at home. There are very high statistics in our community of brothers and sisters being inappropriate. And as a parent, we need to do anything to prevent ever that it's our son who's offending against our daughter. And so looking at it here in this format where so many people can listen and where it's presented in a way that gives them healthy boundaries and healthy supervision is a wonderful, wonderful tool to prevention.
Yeah, for sure. And, segueing to the third episode where we're going to be doing role playing in those conversations between both, male, parents with a male child and parents with a female child. Mrs. Fox, can you give us a little bit of the thought process as to why that is so important?
Really, I'm going to tell you that I think all parents want good for their kids and all parents want to be able to do this. And the truth is they don't all have the conversational tools. They really don't know what to say. Bottom line, how many of us had our parents talk to us about these issues? Not many of us, right? And so when it comes to us doing it towards our children, and because culturally it's really not been done, and so we're hesitant and we don't have the language and we're not sure what to say. And so if we can just give conversational language and opportunities and ways to speak, then people can say, oh, that's what it is. It's that easy.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I think it's also, thank you, Mrs. Fox. You're absolutely correct. There are other components of this. There's a situational awareness that when we grew up, people didn't think this way, that this is something that might pose a danger. But that, where the rooms are situated and where guests from outside the house come in, all of those pieces to make parents more aware. And it's another thing I spoke about in one of the daily clips recently, was that we should embrace it, the education. So often people tell me during classes and Q&A afterwards, like, Rabbi Horowitz, I'm so glad you're talking about it, but look at this generation. We have to talk like this and look at what we need, these things. And I usually say, I'm like, remember the good old days when nobody did anything? What do you mean? We should embrace this. We shouldn't, this is not something that we're doing because we have to do it. This is something we should embrace. This is our children's safety. There are perfectly appropriate ways that, in fact, it's the ultimate tzniut, it's the ultimate modesty to speak about child safety. So we should also embrace it. What Mrs. Fox said about what we need to learn, we should do it with pride and with joy that we're doing what we can to keep our kids safe.
100%. And the fourth episode, we're not going to discuss too much now, but the fourth episode is about organizations, and you'll have to wait till that episode where Rabbi Hauer will come back on to give us a full introduction for that episode. And before we get to the actual episode, just want to explain that besides for these incredible 4 episodes we also have articles and courses that are up on our website. As Rabbi Hauer mentioned, this is meant to be a true resource for parents. It's not just for this month, but in general. This is such an important topic that we really are really putting a lot into to make sure that our parents are as educated as possible to really prevent this from being a thing anymore within our community. So without further ado, enjoy the episode. We have the pleasure of speaking tonight with Rachel Zimmerman, who holds a master's in clinical psychology and has tremendous amount of background in. First of all, she has background in cognitive behavioral therapy. She has worked for over a decade at the Federation in Chicago in their family services, running their child abuse prevention program for the Jewish community. And she's a dynamic presenter on boundaries, abuse prevention, healthy relationships. And really want to say a major thank you to Rachel for taking the time out tonight to talk to us about this.
I'm happy to be here.
So first things first, do parents still need to be as concerned about child abuse nowadays in light of, there's been a lot of progress that has been made? Is it still something that should be, should we be taking such a month to focus on child abuse and child safety? Or is, there's so much enhanced child safety education that we don't really need to be doing it?
This is a really important question, and actually one that I've heard before, because thank God in the 15 to 20 years that I've been working in this field, I really have seen a lot of growth and a lot of good work being done and a lot of difference in the community. I remember when I first started working, people would say to me, "But Rachel, really, there's child abuse within the Jewish community? Is that actually true?" And though I still do believe there's people who think like that, I do not get that question as much anymore. I really do think that so many of the professionals in Rabbanim in our community have done so much to make us in a different place. That being said, this is a human problem that is never going to go away. When people say to me, is this something we still need to worry about? I say, if we had to write halachas about it in the Chumash, then clearly this is something that's been around since the beginning of time. And this will most likely be something that comes with us all the way through for the rest of the time that we have any type of relationship issues, any type of mental health issues, any type of issues where people can hurt one another. This issue is always going to be prevalent and always going to be something we need to continue to talk about. So yes, we're doing so much better. And yes, the same way we're always going to teach our children about all different levels of safety, this is going to continue to be a very important piece for a parent to have in their toolbox to be able to teach them how to stay safe in this abuse arena as well.
Totally. So what are those toolbox? What are the most important practical steps that parents can take to help keep their children safe?
I was looking at this question and I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, do we have 2 hours? No, but truly, I'm going to say some of the things that I think are most important. And that being said, there are a lot of good podcasts and books and information out there. So I do think that this is something that every parent should take the time to learn about, either with an organization in their own community. If people want to contact me through this podcast to find out other specific resources, I'm happy to help them. So I'm going to say a few, but that being said, I know that there's many others. One of the most important ones that I feel very passionately about is body awareness. Teaching your kids a few different things from the time they're very young. The first is teaching their kids that there's nothing wrong or bad about their body or any parts of their body, even when we're doing toilet training, even when we're doing bath time, to teach our kids the difference between the concept of privacy and wrong or bad. Right? So we want to teach them, we're going to close the door when you're going to the bathroom when we're teaching you how to, because it's private, right? A lot of times in a lot of books will say we should teach kids, and I teach my own kids to say, your body belongs to you. You get to say who gets to see your body, who gets to touch your body, any of those things. but there are things that are private that are not for everybody. Right? So teaching them the difference between what privacy is and that there's nothing bad or wrong. That's number one. Teaching them the different parts of their body, the different body parts and what they are, what their names are for them. Now, I know that there's differences of opinion on these, but I really do think that it's very important that people have the language to be able to discuss every part of their body. If it hurts, if there's something going on with it, if they are trying to figure out how to cover it, whatever it is, they need to know the language.
And that you're saying that people should actually know the exact names for it.
So here's what I want to say on this. This is not the mountain I want to die on in terms of like as a mental health professional. I do believe that kids need language. I have definitely worked with a variety of different parts of the community that have said, we have language. We don't just use the specific scientific terminology. That doesn't work in our community, but we know what our kids are saying. They know what we're saying. We do have language. There's no shame about it, but we don't use those specific words. Is that okay?
Sure.
And to me, that's more important. Like the overall feeling of like no shame, it gets talked about. A kid knows they can come to their parent and talk about having to do with their private parts is more important. But yes, I teach my kids the actual names of their body parts, and I do think that's a really good thing. But I absolutely respect that there's some people who that culturally will not work for them. Totally. And the other piece of that is also, besides for being able, to be able to name it, to know that it's private, to know that it belongs to you, all of those things are incredibly important. I'm a very big proponent of puberty education and sexual education as your kids get older, and that you being the resource for that. And I believe that you doing that and jumping in to be that resource and give that education is actually a form of abuse prevention. And there's a lot of research that supports that as well.
What do you mean? Why is that?
Because what unfortunately we have found happen is that when there are kids who are being, I'm going to use the word groomed, but I'll explain what that means, which is that when somebody has targeted a child to abuse them, touch them inappropriately, other things, they will often prey on children that have little to no body or sexual education and then jump in to be the educator. So they will often say to kids, oh, I'm allowed to touch here. Your mommy and daddy didn't tell you that? Oh, no, this is me checking to make sure that everything is working, which obviously we as the adults know is sick and wrong. But if you haven't jumped in to tell your kid differently, why necessarily would they know that? And I've been involved in a couple of different situations, unfortunately, all across the developmental levels, all the way into like teenager and young adulthood, where if we don't give our kids the proper education on puberty and sexual education and what healthy touch looks like, then unfortunately somebody could prey on that and jump in to be the educator, which we don't want.
Right. They just have no idea. They don't even know that there's something wrong. Right.
100%. Okay. So body awareness and education, I think is one of the most important things, making yourself somebody that your kids know. Might be, and you can normalize, it's a little embarrassing to have to come talk to me about bathroom stuff. I get that, but like, I'm so happy you did. And thank you so much. It's so important to me that you came to me to tell me that hurts, or that someone tried to look in the bathroom at school. It's so important. Which kind of like goes into the next piece, which is having conversations about the fact that no one's allowed to look at, touch, or talk about the private parts of your body, and that you're not allowed to look at, touch, or talk about the private parts of somebody else's body, and that it's never a game and never a secret. And there's a lot of kids' books that use a lot of this language. So I feel like I could close my eyes and say this in my sleep, but parents can really learn how to use that type of language, and it can roll off their tongue pretty easily. And that if kids know that, then you say, okay, so if it's never a game and it's never a secret and it's not something we do, it's so important that if something like that does happen, even if you're not sure if it was on purpose or not, it doesn't matter. I want to know. I want to know as your mom.
Right.
I want to know as your dad. I want to know as your, whoever the trusted adult is that's giving this speech. So you're already from a young age setting up these conversations that like, these are the kind of things you want to know. So those are really important as well. I find that parents who have a really I kind of get stuck and like, oh, this sounds a little hard to do. Buy a kid's book. There's really good kids books out there. And I read it to them every once in a while, not every night. One thing I definitely want to mention is that we cannot get too anxious that we are almost like overdoing it with kids on this and making them think that this is the most important thing and they have to be very worried about it. We don't want to do that.
Sure.
I would say every few months, reading something like this, maybe once or twice a year, you get in the habit of reading a book and then checking
books
in.
That you would recommend on the top of your
There's so many good ones. I know, Rabbi Horowitz has a really good book, Let's Stay Safe, which is wonderful. I think there's another one also called Private Spaces. Rabbi Moshe Bach, I think, has a wonderful book. There are other really ones. There's one that was written not necessarily for the Jewish community called the bathing suit lesson. It was actually written by a police officer, that uses really nice language. And all it's about is that, the private parts of your body are what's covered by a bathing suit. And that if anyone tries to do anything underneath the bathing suit area, I want to know as your parent. Very simple.
Right. Interesting.
So, and I could probably think of other resources too, if anyone listening ends up wanting to know more. Okay. Sorry. Going back to my toolkit. Another piece is that if you're going to ask your kid to have to tell you this kind of stuff, you need to on purpose be somebody who doesn't overreact when your kids come to you to let you know they've done something wrong.
Right.
Because we need to make sure that obviously there has to be consequences sometimes. We need to redirect kids. there may need to, be a situation where you handle with a punishment of some kind, whatever it is. But your tone has to be the type of tone where it's like, okay, that was hard. This isn't good. There's going to have to be repercussions, but we're okay. And I love you and our relationship is okay. And that messaging is very important, because we need to make sure that our kids know that they can approach us with hard things.
Sure.
In setting up our kids' lives and sort of thinking through, we need to make sure that our kids are never completely alone in a room with an adult. I remember one of my kids took flute lessons when she was a kid, and there was little classrooms along this long hallway, and they had a window in the door, which is exactly right, but she was alone with a teacher. And I would make it my business to once or twice a lesson, walk up the hallway and walk down the hallway and sometimes wave in the window. And my daughter hated me for it. But really, I was trying to send a message to the teacher. It was hey, there's an adult here that's seeing and supervising.
Right.
So thinking through those things, and these things happen innocently. Someone's tutoring your child for their bar mitzvah. We just think about open spaces or a place where anyone can walk in and it's not completely private and things like that.
Sure.
So looking at the different relationships in our children's lives also is really important. Teaching kids from a really young age about their uh-oh feeling. And I would say trusting your uh-oh feeling as well. That if something doesn't feel right about any relationship in their life, or if you're feeling not right about a relationship in their life, please trust your gut and do something with it. It doesn't mean you have to completely take every person away from every relationship. If I took my kids away from every relationship I had even an uh-oh feeling about, they'd probably be with nobody. Just kidding. But just this idea of we need to trust it and have conversations about it, do something with it. And something, along those lines, teaching your kid about their uh-oh feeling and trusting your uh-oh feeling.
I'm just curious. How do you teach the child about the uh-oh feeling without making them maybe feel too maybe anxious or nervous or worried?
That's a
not
good
to be
question.
too on the lookout, I guess,
So I think let's say my kid goes on a play date. And one of the things I was going to say, it's really important after your kids go to different new experiences, a play date when they're younger, a sleepover, overnight camp, is that we get into the habit of afterwards asking them questions. Not rapid fire, challenging questions, but just open. How was it? What was your favorite part of it? What was your least favorite part of it? Was there any least favorite part of it? Would you want to go again? Real open and calm, right? So let's say you're having one of those conversations about a play date and your kid says, you know what? He has an older brother and I really don't like the older brother. He's constantly making fun of us and chasing us around, and the mom's not always around to make sure the older brother doesn't hurt us. Right. And so that's a great example of being oh, it sounds like your uh-oh feeling is saying, I don't like this. So let's figure out a way. Should we invite him over to our house next time? Would you feel comfortable if I said something to mom? Maybe she doesn't even know. So we're not trying to end relationships here. We're trying to just teach them, pay attention to it, and then brainstorm what to do with it.
So you're not saying to them beforehand, I want to talk to you about the uh-oh feeling. It's more post facto, more very casually, just oh, that sounds like an uh-oh feeling. Oh, what do we do with that? That type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And also using yourself. I will sometimes say oh, I was in this situation today and I had a major uh-oh feeling. Sometimes we like to, at the dinner table, we'll go through, everyone at the table gets to say their best and their hardest parts of their day. And I often will pick things that I want to be, this may shock you, I'm not actually venting to my children. So I'd like to pick something that I could use as a way, to teach them something. So I will sometimes pick something in my own life and be like, and you know what? I didn't like it. I didn't like the way that guy talked to me, gave me a major feeling. So I decided that I'm going to switch doctors, dentists, accountants, whatever it is for next time. Cause that's important. So I think in both ways we teach that feeling piece.
Right. For sure.
The one other piece I just want to say before, we move on in terms of the toolkit. And again, as I said, I really probably could talk for a long time about a toolkit, is that we want to give kids, and this is a little bit of a controversial piece, the ability to say no respectfully to an adult. And to be able to learn that language of how we do that. Now, again, we're going to teach differences. If the teacher in school says, hey, everybody, it's time to put away your lunch and bring out your stuff for math, your kid may respectfully, no, that's not where we're going to use that tool. Right. But if somebody wants to hug and squeeze you and tickle you, if you have an uncle that loves to tickle you and you hate it, we're going to brainstorm. We're going to role play ways that the next time you could say to Uncle Sammy, I don't really like it when you tickle. Could you stop? Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm not going to tell the kid, but I'll probably be right behind him in the kitchen, making sure that Uncle Sammy knows how to stop. But that type of thing we want to be able to enable. And this is a balance. It really is, because I do believe that respect for adults is something we're losing in today's generation. So I do feel very passionately about helping kids understand that there is a certain respect we have. And yet when it comes to your body and your feeling, we have to be able to teach that your voice is important even as a child.
Totally. It's interesting because I was about to ask that question, how do you strike that balance then? Right. So it's
a lot of things are about brainstorming different situations together. Let's think through times where it really doesn't make sense for you to get to say no, and times where no, it's really important. So a lot of role plays, a lot of thinking of different examples, a lot of what if games, if you're going on a sleepover, you might want, what if, you're at a sleepover and this happens and the older sister walks in and wants to play an inappropriate game while you guys are there and the mom is not home and she's babysitting. Then what? What would you do? The what if game I find to be very helpful. But in terms of that balance, I don't know if you or I could necessarily answer in a black and white way what that balance is. And our goal is to really teach the kids the difference between it and model it ourselves.
Sure. Right. Totally. So I'm curious, if I were to ask you to finish this sentence, okay, the sentence of, within child safety, obviously, I wish more parents knew what would that be for you?
You are your child's greatest resource, potentially.
Why is that what you wish they knew more of?
I really do believe, and I am going to have a caveat to this, that your love, your trust, your connection, even your mistakes that you make and then repair and say, I'm sorry about, is the framework for which your children learn trust and self-confidence and healthy relationships and all of the things that are prevention factors for children in abuse. And I wish you knew how incredible you are. And I know, okay, so you don't get everything done and dinner can be late and sometimes you get the kids late to school and sometimes you blow it and you totally yell at them, and that's okay. You can repair, you can fix, you can be human, you can all of those things. My kids tell me all the time, you were not such a good mom before, 10 years ago, but you're doing much better now. And I'm really appreciative because we're all works in progress. Now, that being said, I think it's very important to say that that doesn't mean that being a good parent is 100% a prevention for abuse. I need to make sure that that's very clearly said. Being a good parent is the best we can do, and we dive in and all of those different pieces. I'm saying that it's an incredible piece, but you could do everything 100% right. I could give you an 18-hour lecture on all the prevention toolkits, and you still may not be able to prevent everything. And that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. And I think that's so important for parents to hear. But I still stand by my statement. You are your kid's most important resource.
Totally. That's parenting in general, right? You could do everything right and the end of the day, there's only so much that we can control.
Yeah,
so much.
100%.
100%. Do you think, I'm just curious, do you think that attitudes to child safety are very, in a way, generational? And I guess, and if so, how are the attitudes of today's parents different from those of the previous generation?
So I think one point we already started talking about, which is this idea of respecting elders, and kids really don't get to say no. Yeah. I think that has shifted. Now that being said, sometimes I think it shifted too far in the other direction in this generation. Sometimes like I worked in a girls' high school, and sometimes we would have parents who was like, my daughter's just very uncomfortable with tests. And like, I'm like, oh, okay. So we have to fight. If your daughter struggles from anxiety, let's get her the help she needs. Let's get her, whatever. But the goal is not to shield your child from all things that make them uncomfortable. That's not what we want in any way, shape, and form as a parent. So I do think that's a generational shift, is that I do think we respect the voice of children in a much better way than we used to. And I sometimes think we're going too far the other way. But that's one. The other piece is the other generational shift, I think, is that people have started to see people who sorry,
just to stop you for a second. So in terms of that, like on the listening to the child's voice, you're saying, and the way that impacts child safety is in what way?
Because if a child thinks they will be believed, they are much more likely to report that something has happened.
But that's often, also why sometimes things are getting reported that are maybe not even, are being blown out of proportion sometimes.
Agreed. And I am a very big proponent of there needs to be a process. There needs to be a very good investigation system and thing that we do. When, like we can't jump on every little piece. I have been involved in situations that have been blown out of proportion. I will say there are much fewer and farther between. Most of the time when a kid
generally when there's smoke, there's fire. That's the general.
In general. But I also do believe, and especially being, the family member and wife and mother and of many educators in the world, I do believe we do need to be careful in today's generation and not just always throw educators under the bus at the slightest provocation. And that being said, that means we need good systems in place, and it's upon every Jewish institution to have good systems and protocols and policies in place.
That's very true.
But the voice, like listening to the voice, respecting the voice, making sure that kids could say no, or, have an out or an escape plan if they feel uncomfortable. And that generational shift of empowering children towards that, I think is an incredibly important one.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were saying something, the second generational shift.
The other piece I was just thinking about is in terms of the Rabbanim of our community, and thinking about the idea of if somebody has hurt a child, can they do Teshuvah? And what does that mean? And I've seen a lot of shift in that respect. Also, I don't know anything about a person's spiritual. I wouldn't say I don't know anything. It's not my purview to know anything about a person's Teshuvah or spiritual piece of this, but that a person who has problematic behaviors against children, we can't just trust that can just go away according to good intentions, and enough davening. We need a lot of professional intervention, a lot of maintenance plans, and we prioritize the safety of children. I'm not to say that people, I am actually a believer in that we actually do need to care and think about offenders and people who offend. In terms of, I believe that the safer and the better we are as a community at meeting their needs in a safe way, actually the safer they are and most likely not to reoffend. And again, there's a lot of research behind that as well. So I'm not anti, some people are like, I don't really care what happens to the person who hurts a child. And I totally get that way of thinking. But at the same time, I also think we do need to do something to help keep that person safe. But it's not Teshuvah. And I believe that shift amongst the Rabbanim has been a very important one.
Interesting. Meaning you're saying previously the Rabbanim felt that there could have been more of a Teshuvah, you're saying, or didn't feel that there could be?
There could be. And that if a person came to them and said that they were repentant and that they wanted to do Teshuvah.
You're saying now it's...
And now I think that most Rabbanim are in
a place... It
wouldn't
be accepted. It wouldn't be accepted now.
I don't think so. Or it could be accepted, but that doesn't mean you get to go back to being with children. Like their spiritual, piece of it is completely separate from then their safety of being able to be around children. Like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like that, like I'm not saying that a rabbinic figure can't help them towards that piece, but that doesn't mean they get to go back.
Right. Very interesting. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much for this first segment of this episode.
Thank you.
For this next segment of this first episode about the importance of parent-child communication in abuse prevention, we have the pleasure to be speaking to Avremi Zippel, whose story is known. I had the pleasure of listening to him on Living L'Chaim, and it was interesting when I heard him share his story. And I'm not going to say much, but he one of the things he said he would never tell anyone. It was very fitting within what we're talking about to be talking to him for this next segment, and a really major thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I guess first, just give us a little bit of background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're up to, who you are, for anyone who hasn't yet listened to that amazing podcast.
Well, my name is Avremi Zippel. I'm a Chabad Shliach in Salt Lake City, where I was actually raised and spent my entire childhood. My parents started the Chabad house here 31 and a half years ago. And so, I grew up on the job. I grew up in that sort of environment and that sort of community and that sort of entire life structure. I never knew anything different. I never knew any other reality. And from a young age, it was something which I wanted to pursue myself one day. And Baruch Hashem, I'm grateful for the opportunity that's now become my reality. And now I'm raising my own kids in it. And so that's definitely, as far as I'm concerned, a huge bracha and something which I'm very grateful for. And so that is definitely special. One of the realities of growing up in Salt Lake City in the era that I did is that there was no Jewish educational infrastructure at the time. There was no day school. There was not so much as a preschool. There was nowhere for us to go to school. Nowadays, obviously, Chabad on a global level is a lot more organized and taking care of things with the advent of technology. This was a different time. It was a different generation. There was no online school or anything of the sort. And so my siblings and I were homeschooled. Quite literally. Nowadays, the term homeschooled lends itself to a number of different interpretations. Right. But we actually had a bedroom in the main floor that was converted into a classroom, and that's where we got our education. We were homeschooled quite literally. My father was not at home most of the day. He was out doing all the things that make up the life of a shliach, and visiting with people, and learning with people, and taking care of a community. My mother was our primary educator, and as a result of that, from a young age, we had a caregiver at home. I'm the oldest of six. Obviously, at the top, we're bunched together pretty closely. And so from a pretty young age, there was a full-time caregiver at home. There was someone who was at home who was meant to assist with all of us so that my mother could focus on teaching us. And that's pretty much where our story this evening begins.
Wow. So how old were you when this started, when this happened?
So about a month after my 8th birthday, our family's caregiver began to sexually abuse me. Began is a term in that sentence that I use very intentionally. I'm a very firm believer that at the end of the day, as parents, there's not a tremendous amount that we can do to prevent our kids from having one or the first uncomfortable encounter, one situation that they find themselves in where they find themselves to be somewhat compromised or made uncomfortable. As parents, it's our responsibility to make sure that first one, that one does not lead to anything past that there should not be a began. If God forbid, there's one incident that happens, it should be a one-off, an isolated incident, and it should be nipped in the bud right then and right there. As a kid, I didn't have that sort of vocabulary. I didn't have that ability to nip that in the bud. And so in my instance, it began when I was 8, and it would end up continuing for a number of years after that. And like these things happen, if they're not addressed and given the proper care and attention immediately right away, they will usually metastasize and develop and turn into a long-term problem.
Wow. At the time when you were, at the age of 8, did you think to tell your parents? Is that did that thought even cross your mind? I mean, I know it's hard to think back to that, but.
Sure. So the answer is a pretty blatant no. And I think that the justification for that is grossly misunderstood. And I think it was the case for me, and I think it's the case for a lot of kids who go through these sorts of experiences. And I think that in understanding that, it allows us to really properly understand this entire conversation, this entire dynamic of child sexual abuse. There's a perception that at its core, child sexual abuse is very often motivated by coercion. Threats of violence, actual violence, perceived violence, that the kids won't talk because someone is threatening to hurt them or hurt their family or take away their Shabbos treats, whatever that sort of situation might look like. And I think that assuming that is what motivates the continuation of child sexual abuse is predicated on the idea that most child sexual abuse happens in terror-filled situations. It happens in situations where the child is scared into silence. For me personally, I wasn't scared into silence. In fact, I was never told one time, don't tell, you can't tell, you mustn't tell. I wasn't going to tell anybody because I didn't want to get myself into trouble. And so that decision to not speak up about it was strictly guided and motivated by a sense of self-preservation. I wasn't trying to keep somebody else's secret because I didn't want them to come down hard on me or punish me or treat me in any sort of adverse way. I didn't tell anybody because who knows what would have happened to me in that case. And I think the same is true.
What does that mean though? What weren't you sure what would happen to you? Meaning you're
so
from your own self?
No, from my parents. I was convinced that what I was engaged in was so wrong and so not tznius and so immoral and so inappropriate and so beyond the pale that anybody in the world knowing about it would implicate me in the most intense way possible. It would be my life on the line. And so I wasn't trying to protect anybody else. I was strictly trying to make it through another day. And every day that I succeeded in no one finding out about it was another day that I succeeded at self-preservation. As human beings, we are wired to do one thing. We are wired to take care of ourselves. A baby comes out of the womb. It's hungry. It's cold. It's uncomfortable. It cries and it cries and it cries till it gets the things that it perceives it needs in the spirit of self-preservation. Children are wired from the day that they enter this world to do whatever it is they need to do to keep fighting to live another day. And so what I went through and what I think a number of kids go through is a decision to stay silent in the spirit of self-preservation, in the spirit of keeping myself alive and keeping myself out of trouble. There was no motivation to protect anybody else beyond myself. It was on a certain level, it's a funny way to think about it, but it was a very selfish decision. It was motivated strictly by care and concern for my own safety and well-being, not anybody else's. And I think a lot of people don't realize how true that is for many, many kids, where the characteristics that lead up to the abuse are not coercive and they're not dangerous and they're not filled with terror and dread. It's a power imbalance. It's a situation where an adult perceives that the child will keep their secret, the child will keep them safe because of that perceived concern for the child's own well-being. And that was me. That was 100% my story. No one was going to know because I did not want to get into trouble. It was really that simple.
Wow. Do you think that there's something that can be done to shift that narrative, meaning for that fear or self-care to be done to come out in a different way for children? Meaning, is there something that parents could do? Is there advice that you'd give to parents based on your experience?
When I was a kid, like I said, I spent a lot of time at home, but the one time that we left home was for summer camp. I went to a Chabad overnight camp in the Catskills every year. And every year before we left home, we got the same speech on the way to the airport. And that is that if somebody hurts you or hits you or threatens to hurt you or hit you, remember that your tati is a lot stronger than anybody who might put you in that sort of position. And if that happens, you make your way to the payphone immediately and you call your tati. Tati will get on the first plane over there and he'll beat the snot out of whoever threatened you and you have nothing to be concerned about. So fair enough, right? So if my counselor came into my bunkhouse one night and pulled me onto the porch and just smacked me upside the head, I know exactly what to do. I get down the next morning and I call my father and he comes and we're all good. What happens if the counselor takes me out of my bed one night, takes me onto the porch of the bunkhouse and says, "Hey, I want to make a deal with you. I want to give you $100. Here's a $100 bill. Now you can keep these $100 so long as you don't tell anybody." if you tell someone, I'm going to have to take the money back. But if you don't tell anybody, then you can hang on to the $100. And in a week from now, you can buy whatever you want with those $100. And if you're quiet for a week, in a week from now, I'll probably give you more money. I'm not threatened. I'm not in danger. But all of a sudden, I'm now keeping my own secret. And right now, all of a sudden, this adult has put me in a position where I feel like I'm holding something back from the adults in my life, from the trusted adults in my life. And I am now the one who is putting in place an obstacle and a wedge in between my relationship with them. I think the way our attitude needs to change as parents is we need to share with our kids that there should never be a single topic under the sun that should fill you with shame at the prospect of sharing it with us. Anything that you might be caught up in, any situation that you might feel that might have compromised you or made you feel guilty or made you feel embarrassed or made you feel somehow less than, or whatever the case is, should never be an obstacle or a hindrance from bringing it up to your parents, because we will always have your back. Now, as parents, I don't feel like that attitude coddles our kids. You know, if my kid went and he, busted a neighbor's window, or he did something, that was really inappropriate, I would love him and I would care for him. I would help reinforce the consequences of his actions so that he doesn't go bust every window in the neighborhood, but without shame. I would want him to understand that our dynamic is one that is created where there should never be any sort of anxiety or fear around sharing something that is going on that might lead you to that sense of shame. By and large, when children decide to hold on to the secrecy around child sexual abuse, that's why they're not talking about it. They're not talking about it because if you would know what I was caught up in, I don't even want to imagine how that would alter your perception of me. I don't even want to imagine what you would think of me if you knew the truth. And so as parents, I think it's our job to dispel that notion to the ends of the earth. There is nothing that we could find out that you might have gotten caught up in that would change our perception of you, that would lead us to feel shame or guilt around something which you may have gotten involved in. We will love you. We will have your back. We will support you. And there should never be a single topic. And in a certain sense, I would encourage parents to challenge their children. I want you to think about something which you wouldn't tell us. And I want you to know that, yes, you can even tell us that, obviously, if you fought on the playground or you got a bad mark on a test or you bullied a kid in the hallway, you should tell us that. But encourage your kids to go to the depths of their imagination. And that topic, yes, even that topic, you should feel comfortable to bring up to us, should that ever be a reality in your life.
Right. I'm curious, like, as someone who, I guess, himself experienced that shame, do you think realistically a child can get over that shame? Meaning, what I mean is, when someone themselves is going through in that situation, can they realistically get themselves out of it to the point where they'll be willing to share? Or I guess to say it differently, is there something that parents can do to help them to get out of that prior or during?
Sure. That's a great question. And I think the answer to your question is the earlier, the better, right? Shame is something which piles up quantitatively. And as you deal with it as it grows exponentially, it becomes more difficult to counter. A child who has been through one episode that they feel like causes them a tremendous amount of shame, you can't compare to a child who has been through 3 episodes that cause them that shame, or 6 episodes that cause them that shame. And that kind of goes back to the point that I made at the beginning, empowering our children to speak up as early on in the process as possible gives us the opportunity to have a fighting chance to fight against that shame and that guilt when the quantity is relatively manageable. A child who goes through this for so long, and I think the key point here is a child that goes through that for so long ends up developing really unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with the shame and the guilt, and it becomes so overwhelming and so large and so magnified that they can't imagine not tapping into their coping mechanisms. That becomes the only way possible. And so I think that the key point really is to empower our kids to speak up about it as early as possible so that it doesn't get to that point of unmanageability when it does seem overwhelming. I've spent at this point, February will mark 8 years since I started going to therapy. And one of the things that my therapist still points out till today is that, at this point, even years later, 8 years, I've spent less time in therapy than the time that I spent building up unhealthy coping mechanisms. The amount of time that I spent actively going through the abuse. And so if you think about just the amount of time that a child could spend internalizing that shame and that guilt and building up unhealthy coping mechanisms to process that shame and that guilt, I think it's vital to get in there early. It's vital to get in there as early as possible. And preventing one additional time could make a world of a difference.
Wow. I mean, yeah, as you were sharing it before, I was thinking, I'm like, how did you handle, like you were saying before, like the building up those unhealthy coping mechanisms? I was thinking, like, how did you do that for how many years exactly? What, you said you started at age
10, almost to the month.
Wow.
One of the things I think that is clinically is being understood now about children or adults, but specifically children who go through these sorts of experiences, is that your alarm gets turned off, in the sense that if you spend forever in fight or flight mode, at the end of the day, the processing systems in your brain that are meant to activate when they perceive an active threat stop perceiving active threats, right, because they've just been going for so long. Right. Learned helplessness. That, we're recording this in the middle of the conflict in Eretz Yisrael, and it was remarkable to me. Yesterday, 9 Chayalim died, or 11 Chayalim died. And the fact that, like, the number, were like, no, 9 or 11, given where we've been the past few weeks, obviously our hearts go, and I don't mean to trivialize the Mesiras Nefesh and the sacrifice of but Klal Yisrael has been in 3.5 weeks now of just perpetual red alert mode and perpetual fight or flight mode, that we're beginning to process information differently. And we're beginning to, we've built up already internally such a defense mechanism over the past few weeks, just from this nonstop bombardment of episode after episode and the 24-hour news cycle. And we're just, we're thinking about things so differently than we did even a few weeks ago. And I think about that, developing kind of a lifetime of those experiences. At a certain point, the human mind really does rewire itself to process those sorts of situations differently. A few weeks ago, I had a call from a parent. It was actually right before Sukkot. It was right before the war, and they expressed a measure of almost of disappointment and a failure that their child had been abused a few weeks prior to this phone call. And they almost kind of had the attitude of, I assume as parents, we should throw in the towel. And I felt it's so important to share with them, like, if you can prevent this from happening again, do you understand the world of a difference? The jump from 0 to 1 is as important as the jump from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, God forbid, and onward and onward. And so I think it's vital to get in there early, and also not to lose faith and not to lose hope. God forbid if your kid is in a tough spot, getting them out of that and really minimizing the damage and
right,
putting them in an environment where they can succeed from that point forward is vitally important.
Right. I'm curious. You mentioned, as I mentioned before, that you said on the Living L'Chaim episode that you said you were never going to share it with anyone ever. What, I'm curious on one hand, what got you to share it, but also I'm curious, did you ever end up sharing or talking to your parents about it, post facto or at any point? Meaning, I know you said at first you didn't want to, but at what point, was there a point where you did?
So yeah, there was a point that I told my parents long before I told almost anybody else in the universe. When I started therapy, the two people that I had to tell early on, the two conversations that I had to have early on, were my parents and my wife. When I started therapy, I was married for 2 years. We had a baby, and all of a sudden, I had dragged another human being into this, and now my problem was their problem on a very tangible level. And so having a conversation with my wife was one department, and then I had to have the conversation with my parents. And I had to have the conversation with my parents in a way that, I wanted to go into there with as much work done as possible to not convey to them any sense of blame. Yeah, I had been in therapy for a short while before that conversation, and I was clear enough on the topic to understand that nothing that they did or did not do contributed to the environment. Yeah, I don't believe that my parents were somehow negligent or dropped the ball or missed the signs or the red flags. The person who abused me knew what they were doing on the highest level. And so it was a difficult conversation. And at that point, I think there's kind of there's the transference of the shame and the guilt. Like, okay, I'm working through my shame and guilt. And now by sharing this with you and the fact that, I'm having this conversation once I'm already in therapy, I don't want you to feel the shame and the guilt either. Remarkably enough, as I'm sure any parent can understand, as I now understand as a parent of slightly older kids, I felt a tremendous amount of shame and guilt around that topic. Right. And ultimately that's their journey back from all of this, is processing all of those emotions and having to deal with those realities.
I'm curious if there's things that you changed in the way that you, either the environment that you set up in your own home, like you were mentioning, like once you had a child, you don't want your problems to be their problem. So are there things that you changed about the way you raised your children, or, the home the environment that you set up?
Sure. So for starters, let's acknowledge a few things. Whether or not I had been through my experiences, I'm raising my kids in a very different generation than I was raised in. And this is not a reflection of my parenting versus my parents' parenting. I saw a meme a few weeks ago, it's 8:42 a.m. and I've apologized to my son more this morning than my parents apologized to me in a lifetime. Right. So, there is a generational shift, I think, in how we interact with our kids and some of the messages that we share with our kids.
Right.
One of the really big decisions that I decided to make as a parent was motivated by a conversation that I had with a colleague. Shortly after I disclosed publicly, someone called me up and they said, he was explaining to me he lives in a small town, and in the summer he goes to his in-laws who live in a larger Jewish community, and his in-laws live next door to a family, and his kids are the kids' age, and his kids love to go and play there, and he gets really creepy vibes from the father in the other house. And he wants to find a way to discuss it with his kids. The kids are significantly older than mine. How can he bring it up? And so I said to him, one thing that I would consider is, share with your kid that there are times that you feel uncomfortable, and see if, they can find areas in their life that make them uncomfortable, and create this sort of conversation around uncomfortability. So he says to me, he says, I would never share with my kids that I feel uncomfortable. It's not the tone and the narrative of the conversations that we have. I would never share that idea with them. It's not the sort of parent that I strive to be. And I think that conversation motivated me tremendously, because, I think that one of the ways to create an environment where I can encourage my kids to speak up if they're ever uncomfortable is to share with them there are moments that make me uncomfortable. Wow. I think that if we encourage our kids to practice certain values, to practice certain behaviors, to live a certain lifestyle, the only way we're going to do that is by modeling those behaviors and showing our kids what that sort of response looks like. And so, my kids know that there are certain situations I'll be in and certain conversations that I'll be in that I will be visibly uncomfortable afterwards. I'll be a little shook up afterwards. And I don't think that acknowledging that to my kids is a sign of weakness. I think that sharing with my kids, that really didn't make me feel good, gives them the opportunity to see that behavior in a healthy lens and to hope that they can emulate that one day.
Totally. Wow. I love that. That's very powerful. I love how that the framing of that, of, just being able to talk with them about things that make feel uncomfortable, it's very powerful. Very, very powerful.
I think, it is a lot easier said than done. I think it's an ongoing, not struggle, but it's an ongoing effort, and you do the best you can.
Totally. Thank you so much. It's really so powerful. If you have any final message to share with parents, I'd love to hear, but if not, totally fine.
Parenting is more of an art than a science, and it's not something which we're given a book to master and we get a degree, and it is a gift from the Eibishter, and I think that we're all doing our best at it, and I think that's the nature of the job, and none of us are going to be perfect parents, and I think that growing as human beings and becoming the healthiest human being that we possibly can is the greatest springboard to being the healthiest parent that we possibly can. I think it's the area that is impacted most by our humanity, and the sort of person we are will always affect the sort of parent we are. And that's all we can hope to grow for.
Yeah. Wow. Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable with us, and really appreciate it. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
For this next segment of this episode, we are joined by Rabbi Horowitz, a Jewish educator, a child safety advocate, author of this amazing book, Let's Stay Safe, and his daughter, Sara Horowitz, Berkovich, a licensed social worker, to join us to talk about how parents can really develop this relationship with their children. So this type of relationship where they're willing to talk about anything. So Sara, tell us a little bit. What was it like being able to tell your parents anything? Did it really work that way? Was that like really how it was in your home?
Honestly, that's a great question. And it's a loaded answer, but absolutely that's what it was like. And the best way for me to put it is that it was liberating, because I knew that no matter what I did and no matter what happened, I had someone that I could turn to. I had someone who would listen to me. I know I had someone who would accept me. And by someone, I mean either of my parents, not one, but both of them. They were unbelievable. And they taught me from the time I was young. And it was years and years of groundwork that they laid, that I could turn to them with anything. And they taught me the value of responsibility, the value of consequences of my own actions. And it completely changed my outlook on life.
Wow. That's incredible. So I'm curious, Rabbi Horowitz, if you could tell us a little bit about what did you and your wife do to facilitate that relationship? And I'll add, if you can tell us how all parents, not just Rabbi Yanki Horowitz, who is so known for being such a child safety advocate, how can parents in general, first we'll start with your relationship, how you did that, and then maybe we'll go to, more general.
Right. So my amazing wife, Udi, and we talked about this often as the kids were growing up, and we look at it like there are barriers. Like, why would a child not speak to a parent, right? They're embarrassed. You might not respect their confidentiality. They think you don't get it. There are legitimate reasons why kids wouldn't talk to the parents, especially in the area of child safety, because they're made to feel ashamed. So we told the kids growing up, if there's anything going on in your life, we want to please feel comfortable talking to us. And there's no reason to be embarrassed. And if we're going, you might think we're going to be upset if you tell us things we're not happy with. Of course, we'll be upset about it, but we'll be much more upset if you don't feel close enough to talk to us. I mean, that's really would be my advice to parents. Just think about the legitimate barriers and honestly just check them off. And it becomes a relationship built on trust, hopefully.
Sure. So, Sara, can you tell us maybe either an example or like a time that you went to your parents and told them? I mean, you don't have to share, you don't have to disclose anything you don't want to, but anything, what would happen? Like, take us through what that would look like. You don't have to tell us exactly. If you want to, you can. But
I'll be honest. Just touching on what I mentioned before, my parents really raised me to think about consequences, and they talked, which is something that I mentioned so much, either through therapy that I do, through just talking to parents in general, hopefully in my own life to my own children. I really encourage open conversations with children. I think it changes the way that they approach life. My parents always discussed consequences with me. I don't think I'm very fortunate to say this, but because they raised me to think toward the future, I can't honestly say that I think that there was a time that I called them afraid of what they would say. I really thought my actions through, which is a testament to my parents and how they made me think like an adult and kind of put the onus and the responsibility on me. But obviously everybody has those things as a teenager. I did get into a few fender benders before I got married. And I remember the fear, it's a small example, but I remember that fear of disappointing my parents, that fear of them being angry at me. And I'll say that my father and mother did such an amazing job of helping me feel comfortable. And I've mentioned this before. My father told me when I called him, he said, if you don't want things to happen, don't get out of bed. It's okay. We'll figure it out together. We'll take care of it together. You're okay. You're safe. That's what matters. And everything else is stuff. And it made me feel so comfortable coming to him in the future, coming to him with the big things. These are the small things. And we hope that every parent, I think, hopes that it's only small things. But unfortunately, sometimes there are big things. The way that you can make sure that the big things your kids will come to you for is by handling the small things the way that they did.
Sure. Wow. That's amazing. It's incredible. Do you think that that's something, that this type of relationship is something that can be done for all parents?
Absolutely. I think that it's very achievable, very tangible with the proper guidance. I will say that it takes years of really working with your children, really having a relationship with them, really reaching out toward them. It's constant effort on the parents' part. It's constant effort on, it has to go both ways, but it really is constant effort on the parents' part. And so I will say that if unfortunately a family is maybe in crisis or is dealing with something in the moment and they don't have those years of building up a relationship, maybe seek professional help, see a therapist, see somebody who can mediate between the two of you, but that doesn't mean that relationship can't grow from that point. It absolutely, absolutely can. I believe anyone can achieve this kind of relationship with their children if they're willing to follow through.
And is it the type of thing, I'm curious, maybe for both of you, is it the type of thing that if parents haven't had yet built that relationship up and they're, someone's listening right now and is like, I really want to start. What can they do? Maybe Rabbi Horowitz, what can they do? What steps can they take to really build that relationship up to be to that point?
I think being honest with the kids, if you're listening and you're not there yet, exactly like Sara said, if you're in crisis and things are really stressful with your teenager, it's not the time to work on this. You just got to get your home back to a healthy relationship. And then hopefully you build to that. But to be honest with them and tell them that we're not there, obviously we're not there, but this is something that I really would love to have this type of relationship with you. You parents, you can be sure that the first thing they tell you is not what they really want to talk about. They're going to test you many times before they tell you what's really on them. We actually told our children that they can tell one of us and not the other. And that we will respect their confidentiality. We told them, we said, listen, we don't keep secrets from each other ever. But if you are comfortable talking to only one of us, we promise you that we're going to respect your confidentiality. We never broke it, of course. Wow. And it was fascinating. I'm sorry?
That's a big deal. That's a very big deal.
It was fascinating. And over the years, there were some things they were more comfortable talking to me about.
And I was about to say, Sara, are there times that you were more comfortable talking to either your father or your mother? Is that?
I won't say comfortable. I'll say that maybe it's that each of my parents were really naturally strong and amazing in certain areas. That doesn't mean that they weren't amazing in the other areas. It just maybe one for me, I felt would be able to relate to me in one thing. It didn't mean that, I don't think I ever said, don't tell mommy this, or I feel more comfortable telling you not this parent. But I think just naturally I was inclined to tell maybe one parent one thing, one parent the other thing. But for me, it was never this parent, that parent, but it did help me feel like I could be 100% myself. And it gave me that option and that understanding of, oh, you're putting me first. It definitely helped me to feel that I was being put first in regards to my confidentiality, which was an unbelievable thing for a child to hear.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found over the years is that because of the work that I do, and I deal with a lot of stuff over the course of a quiet week, the kids were generally more inclined to talk to me about something that you needed a strong stomach to handle. So
I wasn't going to go into specifics, but
if the kids would get into trouble, it's only, they've generally speaking felt that I would be able to handle it better. And, but a lot of things, I would say most other things, they would probably talk to her first. It's just about making it available to the children and it's a process.
Right. I'm curious, Rabbi Horowitz, how did you get yourself to a place where you so quickly said exactly like what Sara said before, if you don't want to make mistakes, don't get out of bed in the morning. How did you get yourself to a place? That's impressive for a parent to be at that place, to be able to so easily just and naturally just say that.
That's what I told the kids growing up. I told the kids growing up all the time. With whatever they did, I would say, I would tell the kids that, we're here to help you figure it out. And we hope that you'll be comfortable talking to us. So if you don't want to make mistakes, just what you said, don't get out of bed. Life is about living through your mistakes. I really believe that adolescence is a time that kids should make their mistakes while they're home and the parents can guide them through it. I